Chip Cooper, founder of SaaS Marketer Pro, and also a full-time practicing SaaS attorney. Now, our prior video regarding GDPR, and specifically that was GDPR 1, we were focused on the SaaS provider acting as a data processor. And you'll recall that the big takeaway in GDPR 1 was that when you're acting as a data processor and then subcontracting with a subcontractor, acting in the capacity of a sub-processor, it's your legal obligation to bind that sub-processor with a DPA. So turning to GDPR 2, we're going to focus on essentially how to do that. The title, of course, says how to implement your DPA with a sub-processor. Brief housekeeping announcement. The presentation is for informational purposes only. It is not legal advice. There will be no attorney-client relationship created, and this is only a brief summary, not a full coverage of the subject matter. Now, you'll recall this data flow diagram, and I'm going to click through it to get to the top level, which is the key to this particular video. And there you have a situation just discussed where the processor, you, is subcontracting with a contractor for data processing services, and the subcontractor is acting as a sub-processor. Now, on the right margin, this is the key, this is the big takeaway. You'll recall that it's the processor's legal obligation to bind that sub-processor with a DPA. Now, quickly, before we get to how to do it, panel number 2 there, titled Data Processing Agreement, is the agreement that you typically will have in your quiver in order to determine whether to present that or not, and we'll get into that right away. Okay, the question again is, how do you implement your DPA with sub-processors? And the answer is, it depends. And I provide for you a website hosting example to illustrate what the depends means. At the very top, you see what has become sort of the gold standard for corporate America, Amazon Web Services for hosting services. And at the bottom would be a much smaller company, an imaginary company, called Acme Hosting Services, much smaller than AWS. And if you look at the bullets there, very self-explanatory. AWS is a large company, and they will not negotiate with you on your DPA that you have in your quiver. They integrate their DPA into their terms of service. So basically, the DPA decision that you need to make is take it or leave it. If you're going to become a customer of AWS, it's a part of their TWS, which they do not negotiate. So you're either going to take that DPA or leave it as a part of the TOS. Now, the much smaller company, Acme Hosting Services, probably will negotiate, and this is where you need to have your DPA ready in your quiver to submit to Acme Hosting Services, acting as a sub-processor. So how do you differentiate between the two? The big company, which is not going to engage in negotiations, and the smaller company, which probably will. Here's basically how you do it. And look at the very bottom. This is the key to how to differentiate. You need to remember when you're dealing with this sub-processor, you either are an existing customer of theirs, or you want to be, or are considering that you will be their customer. So they should provide information to you and answer your questions about a DPA. So bullet number 1, you simply contact them and ask about a DPA. Now, Amazon Web Services is not going to basically go into a big explanation. They're going to point you to probably a link that describes the situation whereby their DPA is baked into their TOS. However, the small company probably will. But there's another way to go about finding out exactly what the situation is with respect to a DPA. And that's the second bullet, engage a search engine. In this particular case, I searched Google, and the search term you can see there in quotes was AWS Data Processing Addendum. And again, I mentioned a little earlier that a number of the bigger companies refer to a DPA as an addendum rather than an agreement. It's still the same thing. So after I did that test search, Immediately, I was presented with all of the information I needed to know regarding how AWS handled its DPA. Clearly, it's not negotiable. So this is how you go about making that differentiation. This is the final slide in this particular video. Quick housekeeping announcement. You're definitely going to need an attorney to guide you regarding GDPR compliance. And if you're interested in engaging me in a discussion about how we might work together and in terms of an attorney-client relationship, all you really need to do is email me at the email address shown there, digicontracts, which is digi with the word contracts afterwards, @gmail.com.